Mr. Carter, your blood pressure is dangerously high, and you have worrying neurological symptoms. You need to go to the hospital now," said the cleaning lady with a firmness that made the billionaire CEO stop shouting on the phone. Jonathan Carter, 53, owner of a pharmaceutical empire worth $2 billion, looked at the 42-year-old black woman as if she had just spoken Chinese. Amara Lewis stood there in her uniform, holding cleaning supplies, having the audacity to give him medical advice. "Excuse me," Jonathan laughed derisively, lowering his cell phone. "Are you giving me medical advice now? What is your background again? Advanced cleaning?" The sarcasm cut through the air of the luxurious office on the 30th floor of the Carter Biopharma Tower. Amara had just witnessed Jonathan staggering, his hands shaking, and his mind confused during a video conference meeting, symptoms she recognized immediately, but which all the executives present completely ignored. "Sir, I'm not just," Amara began, but was interrupted. "You're nothing but a cleaning lady," Jonathan growled, his face red with irritation. "Go back to your chemicals and let me run my company in peace. And next time, clean in silence." What Jonathan didn't know was that Amara Lewis had been a registered nurse for 15 years before losing everything in a fabricated scandal, a case of racial discrimination so brutal that it forced her to take cleaning jobs to survive. But her medical mind never stopped working. She had noticed the signs for weeks: the slowed coordination, the occasional slurred speech, the episodes of disorientation that Jonathan dismissed as business stress. All the symptoms pointed to a serious neurological condition that, if left untreated, could be fatal. "I understand perfectly, Mr. Carter," Amara replied with unsettling calm. "I'll keep doing my job." But while Jonathan returned to his million-dollar calls, Amara did something he would never expect. She began discreetly documenting everything. Every symptom, every episode, every moment when his arrogance overcame his survival instinct. Jonathan Carter thought he had complete control over his company and the people below him. What he didn't realize was that the woman who cleaned his office was keeping a secret that could save his life if he stopped being arrogant enough to listen. As Amara quietly organized her cleaning supplies, her trained eyes continued to observe. She knew exactly what was happening with Jonathan Carter, and more importantly, she knew exactly what to do about it. If you've ever been underestimated because of your color or social status, then you know that sometimes the best revenge is simply being right when everyone else is wrong. Subscribe to the channel to find out how an unimportant cleaning lady would become the only person capable of saving the life of the man who despised her. 3 days later, Jonathan Carter was worse, but his arrogance had tripled. During an executive board meeting, Amara witnessed him confuse the names of his own directors and repeat the same question 3 times in 10 minutes. When she discreetly approached to clear the conference table, she overheard fragments of the conversation that alarmed her. "Jonathan, are you okay? You seem confused today," Michael Ross, the CFO, murmured with genuine concern. "Confused?" Jonathan exploded, slamming his fist on the table. "I'm perfectly fine. Maybe you're not keeping up with my thinking. I've always been 3 steps ahead of everyone." Amara saw the subtle tremor in his left hand, the way he blinked repeatedly as if trying to focus his vision. Progressive neurological symptoms she had seen many times before when she worked in the neurology department at Metropolitan Hospital, before she was destroyed professionally. The scandal had begun 5 years ago when Amara, then head nurse on the night shift, publicly questioned Dr. Stephen Barnes's excessive opioid prescriptions. She had documented that black patients were consistently given lower doses of painkillers than white patients with identical conditions while being more quickly labeled as drug seekers. "Are you accusing a respected doctor of racism?" asked hospital director Dr. Laura Mitchell during the disciplinary meeting. "Based on what scientific evidence?" "Based on 15 years of experience and 200 pages of detailed documentation," Amara replied, placing her meticulous research on the table. But the internal investigation was a sham. Dr. Barnes was a personal friend of the CEO and a generous donor to the hospital. Instead of reviewing her evidence, they created an alternative narrative. Amara was emotionally unstable and projecting personal issues of race onto medical practice. The final blow came when they discovered that she had allegedly violated medication protocols, fabricated allegations they could never prove, but which were enough to destroy her career. Within 6 months, she lost her license, her reputation, and any hope of ever working in the medical field again. "People like you always think the world owes you something," Dr. Barnes had said on her last day with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe it's time to accept that some places just aren't for you." Now, 5 years later, cleaning out the office of the most powerful man in the pharmaceutical industry, Amara felt a bitter irony. Jonathan Carter owned the company that manufactured the very opiates Dr. Barnes had selectively prescribed. "Are you still here?" Jonathan's sharp voice brought her back to the present. The meeting was over, and he was watching her with irritation. "How long does it take to clean a desk?" "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter, I was just being thorough." He laughed dismissively. "You're a janitor, not a surgeon. Speed matters more than perfection in your line of work." Amara nodded silently, but her trained eyes continued to register details. Jonathan's right pupil was slightly more dilated than his left. His verbal responses had a subtle delay. His fine motor coordination was clearly impaired. Classic signs of increased intracranial pressure. "And another thing," Jonathan continued, adjusting his tie with less precise movements than usual. "Next time you have the brilliant idea of giving me medical advice, remember that I pay some of the best doctors in the country. I don't need the opinion of someone who cleans toilets for a living." The casual cruelty of his words cut deep, but Amara kept her expression neutral. She had learned to absorb humiliation without reacting, a skill developed over years of systematic discrimination. "I understand perfectly, sir," she replied, beginning to put away her cleaning supplies. But as she left the office, Amara made a decision. That night, in her small apartment, she opened her laptop and began to type. Not a formal medical report, she no longer had the credentials for that. Instead, she began something different, a detailed anonymous letter to Jonathan's wife, Helen Carter. Amara had researched the Carter family extensively. Helen was a trained nurse, though she hadn't practiced in years. She would understand the medical terms and recognize the seriousness of the symptoms described. Each word was carefully chosen, each symptom documented with temporal precision, each observation backed up by specific behavioral evidence. She finished the letter at 3 o'clock in the morning, reread it 5 times, and slipped it into an unmarked envelope. Jonathan Carter thought he had silenced another inferior person. What he didn't know was that he had just awakened something far more dangerous than anger. A trained nurse with a mission to save lives, even when those lives belonged to people who despised her. As Amara sealed the envelope, a cold certainty settled in her chest. She would not allow Jonathan's arrogance to kill him, not because he deserved to live, but because she had sworn to save lives. And some oaths transcend the treatment we receive from the people we save. What that billionaire CEO couldn't see was that every insult only strengthened the resolve of a woman who had already lost everything once and discovered she still had a lot to offer the world if anyone was humble enough to listen. The letter arrived in Helen Carter's hands on a quiet Tuesday, delivered discreetly by an anonymous courier. Helen, a nursing graduate from Johns Hopkins University, immediately recognized the clinical precision of the language and the seriousness of the observations described. Progressive neurological symptoms, impaired motor coordination, episodes of temporal confusion, she murmured, reading it for the 3rd time. Each word echoed the concern she herself had tried to express to her husband over the past few weeks, only to be dismissed with the same disdain he reserved for inferior people. Helen knew Jonathan was different. The angry outbursts had become more frequent and irrational. He forgot important appointments, repeated the same stories at dinner parties, and his once impeccable handwriting now trembled like that of a much older man. Who could have written this, she wondered, poring over every meticulously documented medical detail? Someone with formal training, definitely. Someone who watched Jonathan closely, regularly. Meanwhile, on the 30th floor of Carter Biopharma, Amara executed her plan with the precision of a seasoned nurse. During her cleaning rounds, she had discreetly begun documenting everything: times of episodes, intensity of tremors, patterns of mental confusion. She had an unexpected ally, Dr. Evelyn Harper, a retired neurologist who worked part-time as a medical insurance consultant in the building next door. Amara had met her in the parking lot when Evelyn commented on recognizing nursing techniques in the way Amara helped an elderly woman who had stumbled. "You were a nurse," Dr. Harper had observed, not as a question but as a fact. "For 15 years, Amara had admitted, waiting for the usual judgment. Instead, Evelyn held out her hand. "Neurologist for 30, and I still recognize competence when I see it." That casual conversation in the parking lot turned into an unlikely partnership. Dr. Harper, a 62-year-old black woman who had faced her own battles against prejudice in medicine, understood immediately when Amara described Jonathan's symptoms. Brain tumor, aneurysm, or something progressive like multiple sclerosis, Dr. Harper had diagnosed during their conversation at the corner cafe. Any one of those could be fatal if left untreated. "Have you been documenting everything carefully?" Amara showed her handwritten notebook where she had meticulously recorded every observation. Evelyn nodded with professional approval. "This man should have been undergoing neurological tests for weeks. His arrogance is going to kill him." Their plan was simple: provide enough evidence for Helen Carter to demand a complete neurological evaluation. But Jonathan was making it difficult, with his systematic refusal to acknowledge any problem. "Dr. Harrison told me I may be working too hard," Jonathan had commented to Helen over dinner, not realizing he had referred to the dermatologist as if he were his cardiologist. "But I don't trust young doctors. They prefer to diagnose problems that don't exist." Helen had exchanged a worried glance with her daughter, Sophia, who was visiting for dinner. Sophia, a medical student in her final year, had also noticed the changes in her father. "Dad, when was the last time you had a complete checkup?" Sophia had asked delicately. "Checkups are for sick people," Jonathan had replied with growing irritation. "I built a pharmaceutical empire. I think I know when something is wrong with my own body." It was that same week that the most alarming episode occurred. Amara was organizing the conference room when Jonathan walked in visibly confused. "Where is everyone?" he asked, looking around the empty room. "The meeting was canceled, Mr. Carter. You canceled it yourself yesterday," Amara replied gently. Jonathan stared at her with a blank expression, as if he didn't recognize her, even though she had been cleaning his office every day for 2 years. "Who are you?" he asked with a mixture of confusion and irritation. "I'm Amara from the cleaning staff." "Amara?" He repeated her name several times, as if trying to access a lost memory. "You said something about doctors earlier." For a terrifying moment, Amara saw in Jonathan's dilated pupils the same lost look she had seen in neurological patients during her years in the hospital. The person behind those eyes was gradually disconnecting from reality. "Mr. Carter, are you feeling all right?" she asked momentarily, forgetting her position. The question seemed to snap him back. "I'm fine," he growled, returning to his familiar, hostile personality. "And you're not allowed to ask personal questions. Get back to your work." But Amara had seen enough. That afternoon, she called Dr. Harper. "Time is running out," she said. "Today, he didn't recognize me for several minutes. This isn't just arrogance. It's active neurological deterioration." "Then we need to speed up the plan," Evelyn replied. "I'll call Helen Carter directly. As a doctor, I can use professional concern as an excuse." That night, while Jonathan slept heavily, another worrying symptom Helen had noticed, she received a call from Dr. Harper. "Mrs. Carter, this is Dr. Evelyn Harper, neurologist. I have received some concerning information about your husband's symptoms, and I believe he needs immediate neurological evaluation." Helen held the phone with trembling hands. "Doctor, I've been trying to convince him to seek help, but he refuses to listen." "I understand completely. Unfortunately, it is common for patients with neurological conditions to lose the ability to recognize their own symptoms. This is called anosognosia, a consequence of the disease itself." The conversation lasted 40 minutes. When she hung up, Helen had a plan. The next day, she would do something she had never done in 25 years of marriage: confront Jonathan publicly in front of people whose opinions he valued. She invited the board of directors to an informal family meeting to discuss the succession of the company, but in reality, it would be a medical intervention in disguise. Amara, discreetly cleaning the hallway adjacent to the conference room, listened as Helen explained the situation to Sophia and the directors. "My husband is sick, and his refusal to accept treatment is putting not only his life at risk, but the future of the company." What none of them knew was that in the next 24 hours, Jonathan Carter's life would depend entirely on the courage of a cleaning lady he had treated as invisible. A woman who, despite all the contempt she had received, was about to do something that would define not only her character, but possibly save the life of the man who had humiliated her the most. Sometimes the greatest revenge is not destroying someone. It is saving them despite their unworthiness, proving that your humanity is infinitely superior to the cruelty you have received. But would Jonathan's pride allow him to accept help from someone he had always considered inferior? And what happens when saving a life means confronting an entire system that prefers to ignore the wisdom of those it considers worthless? The family intervention took place on a stormy Thursday, just when Jonathan was at his most vulnerable. Helen had orchestrated everything with the precision of an experienced nurse. She invited the 5 top executives of Carter Biopharma to a strategic succession meeting at the family mansion. Jonathan descended the stairs, staggering slightly, trying to disguise his compromised coordination with deliberately slow movements. His left side was noticeably weaker, and his speech occasionally slurred at the edges of words. "I don't understand why we need to discuss succession," he muttered to Helen as he adjusted his tie with trembling fingers. "I'm perfectly capable of running my own company." "Of course you are, dear," Helen replied, watching as he tried to tie his tie 3 times before achieving an acceptable knot. "It's just preventative planning." In the boardroom, the directors immediately noticed the changes in Jonathan. Michael Ross, the CFO, exchanged worried glances with Sandra Hayes, head of operations, when Jonathan referred to the marketing director as "that guy from the sales department." Jonathan, Dr. Harper, who Helen had invited as a medical consultant for executives, interjected, "I've observed some troubling symptoms during our previous meetings: tremors, temporal confusion, impaired coordination." "There's nothing wrong with me," Jonathan exploded, slamming his fist on the table hard enough to knock over his coffee cup. "I'm tired of unqualified people trying to diagnose me." That was the moment it happened. Jonathan tried to stand up to demonstrate his perfect health, but his legs gave out completely. He collapsed into his chair, the left side of his face beginning to twitch involuntarily, his eyes losing focus as he struggled to form words. I don't wear," he slurred, his right hand shaking violently as he tried to reach for the glass of water. Helen immediately dialed 911, but it was Dr. Harper who took control of the situation. "Acute neurological symptoms, possible stroke or secondary seizure. We need immediate transport to the hospital." While waiting for the ambulance, something unexpected happened. Helen received a call from someone she didn't expect, Amara Lewis. "Mrs. Carter, this is Amara from your husband's office cleaning crew. I'm calling because I need you to know that I've documented all of his symptoms over the past few weeks." Helen nearly dropped the phone. You're a nurse?" "I was, before I was forced to clean offices by people who treat me like I'm invisible." The bitterness in Amara's voice was palpable, but there was something else: absolute medical competence. "Your husband has classic signs of a brain tumor or aneurysm. The progressive symptoms, the cognitive decline, the unilateral tremors, it's all documented in my report." "What report?" "The one I sent to all of his company directors 3 days ago. The same one they ignored because it came from a mere cleaning lady." Helen felt the blood drain from her face. You sent it to the directors?" 47 pages of detailed medical observations with precise timestamps and symptom analysis, even a prognosis of deterioration if left untreated. Michael Ross said it was employee paranoia, and Sandra Hayes suggested I be terminated for inappropriate behavior. The revelation hit Helen like a punch in the stomach. As Jonathan was loaded into the ambulance, she realized the full irony. The woman her husband had treated with the most contempt was the only person who had tried to save his life. At the hospital, Dr. Chen's diagnosis confirmed every word Amara had said: a slow bleeding brain aneurysm causing progressive neurological symptoms. If it weren't for the intervention today, he would have suffered a complete rupture within a few days. Death was almost certain. When Jonathan regained consciousness after emergency surgery, his first words were a hoarse whisper. Where is the cleaning lady?" Helen held his hand, still weak from the sedatives. "Amara, she's in the hallway, dear. She's been waiting for 6 hours. She tried to warn me. She tried several times, and you treated her like trash." Jonathan closed his eyes, tears streaming down his pale cheeks. I need to talk to her." When Amara entered the room, Jonathan could barely hold her gaze. The woman he had publicly humiliated stood there, still wearing her cleaning uniform, but carrying a dignity that made his previous arrogance seem pathetic and small. "You saved my life," he whispered. "I've been trying to save it for weeks. You chose to humiliate me instead." "I know," his voice broke. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness." "You don't." Amara pulled up a chair and sat down, keeping a respectful distance. "But I didn't save your life for you. I saved it because I swore an oath to protect lives, and some oaths are bigger than the treatment we receive from the people we save." Jonathan's humiliation was just beginning. In the days that followed, the story leaked out in full. The billionaire CEO who nearly died because he was too arrogant to listen to a nurse cleaner who had correctly identified his symptoms weeks earlier. Sandra Hayes and Michael Ross tried to cover up the scandal, but Helen had kept copies of all the communications, where they ignored and ridiculed Amara's medical concerns. Recordings of meetings where they suggested firing her for inappropriate behavior went viral on social media. The media turned the case into a national symbol of discrimination in the corporate environment. "Black cleaner saves CEO who looked down on her" became the headline for weeks. The Carter Biopharma Board of Directors called an emergency meeting. The company lost $300 million in market value in 3 days, and Jonathan was forced to step down temporarily as CEO for medical recovery and reflection on human resources policies. But the greatest humiliation came when Jonathan learned that Amara had refused all offers of severance pay and paid interviews. "I don't need anyone's blood money," she told reporters. "I need this to serve as an example. Competence and dignity don't depend on diplomas or skin color." While Jonathan recovered from surgery, facing weeks of physical therapy to regain his motor coordination, Amara quietly returned to her cleaning job. But now, every employee at Carter Biopharma treated her with the respect she had always deserved. The man who had spent his entire life belittling inferior people had learned in the most humiliating way possible that his life depended on the very people he considered invisible. And the whole world was watching his lesson in humility being served on the national news. But did Jonathan truly learn his lesson? And what would be the fate of a woman who proved herself greater than all the prejudice directed at her? Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destroying someone. It's forcing them to live knowing they owe their existence to those they always considered inferior. 6 months later, Amara Lewis received the National Heroine Award from the Surgeon General of the United States in a ceremony broadcast live across the country. The same cleaning uniform that had been the subject of ridicule was now framed in the National Museum of African American History with a plaque that read, "The uniform of a woman who proved that competence has no color." Jonathan Carter watched from the front row in a wheelchair he still needed occasionally due to the residual effects of surgery. His hands trembled slightly, no longer from the disease, but from the emotion of seeing the woman he had humiliated being celebrated as she should have been from the beginning. "Ladies and gentlemen," Amara said into the microphone, her voice echoing through the packed auditorium, "for 15 years I was a nurse. For 5 years I was treated as if I were invisible. But today I understand that I never stopped being what I always was, someone who saves lives, regardless of who recognizes it or not." Carter Biopharma had been forced to implement drastic changes after the scandal. Sandra Hayes and Michael Ross were fired for discriminatory conduct, and the company created a diversity program that became a national model. Ironically, the company's stock recovered completely after it demonstrated a real commitment to inclusion. Dr. Evelyn Harper, now medical director of the new Amara Lewis Institute for Preventative Medicine, smiled from the audience. The institute, funded entirely by a $10 million anonymous donation from Jonathan Carter, offered free medical training to people from underserved communities. When that man told me to stay in my place, Amara continued, he didn't know that my place has always been saving lives. He just couldn't see past his own prejudices. Jonathan had tried to reach out to her several times during his recovery, but Amara kept her distance out of respect, not out of anger, but because she understood that some lessons must be lived alone to be truly learned. The public humiliation Jonathan faced was devastating, but transformative. He lost friends, social influence, and was forced to confront decades of casual arrogance. But he also gained something he never had: genuine humility and respect for people he had always considered inferior. Revenge, Amara concluded her speech, is not about making someone pay for what they did to us. True revenge is becoming so great that their smallness can no longer reach us. The ovation lasted 8 minutes. Jonathan was one of the first people to stand, applauding with tears streaming down his face. Later in the hallway, he finally got a chance to talk briefly with Amara. "I was an idiot," he said simply. "You were," she agreed without hesitation. "But idiots can learn if they're humble enough. Thank you for saving me, even though I didn't deserve it." "I didn't save you because you deserved it," Amara replied, adjusting the medal on her chest. "I saved you because some things are bigger than the treatment we receive, and because the best way to overcome prejudice is to prove that our humanity is greater than the cruelty of others." Jonathan nodded, knowing he would spend the rest of his life trying to earn the forgiveness he had already received. Today, Amara runs 3 community hospitals and trains doctors in advanced clinical observation. Jonathan has stepped away from business to devote himself entirely to philanthropy, especially medical education programs for minorities. 2 lives were saved that day, one from a brain aneurysm, the other from terminal ignorance. The greatest revenge against those who devalue us is not to destroy them. It is to become so extraordinary that they spend the rest of their lives trying to understand how they could have been so blind. Amara proved that competence, dignity, and greatness do not depend on the approval of others, but only on an unwavering commitment to being who we truly are.